United States versus Russia. Hours ago, the United States, with assistance from the United Kingdom, carried out the seizure of a Russian-flagged oil tanker in international waters of the North Atlantic. The tanker Mariner had actually begun fleeing US authorities 2 weeks earlier off the coast of Venezuela when it bore the name Vela 1 and initially lacked a national flag. According to US media, Russia had dispatched a submarine to defend the Russian-flagged tanker, which was unable to respond in time to the distress call. In addition, today, the United States carried out the seizure of another oil tanker in Caribbean waters.
De un nuevo petrolero en aguas del Caribe. El imperialismo descarado del
The blatant imperialism of President Donald Trump's government could trigger World War III at any moment. Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning. From Berlin, Germany, we begin broadcast number 315 of Demolishing Myths Talks. Thank you very much for joining us, and remember to give us a thumbs up against censorship. Also, don't forget to follow us on our social media, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, as well as on our Patreon channel, where we show what we can't display here on YouTube. From Madrid, Spain, in Chile, Europe, and in this world that's so turbulent, on January 7th, at the start of the year, we're joined by Fernando Moragón. Hello, Fernando. How's everything over there?
Nos acompaña Fernando Moragón. Hola, Fernando. ¿Qué tal todo por ahí?
Bueno, no está mal, 6 grados.
Well, it can be over 6 degrees, without wind, which in Madrid is essential. The problem with Madrid is that when there's even a bit of wind, the cold gets in everywhere. If there's no wind, it's manageable. But 2 things. 1, very important. I don't know if you thought about it today, but if not, make a brief comment, because I think it's worth it. Frigid Europe is going to get even more frigid, literally, not metaphorically. I don't know if you had planned to dedicate a small segment to our dear Germany. But if not, we have to talk about those power outages in Berlin, which people don't know about, especially in Latin America. I mean, they shouldn't think, no. And it's not like they lasted just a few hours, no. Tell us a bit about those outages in Berlin, since you're over there.
Lo de estos cortes en Berlín, tú que andas allí.
Cortes de luz en Berlín. No recuerdo exactamente.
About the power outage in Berlin, I don't remember exactly how many households were affected, but it was something like 45,000, no more and no less, since Saturday, some even until tomorrow, according to the electric service forecasts. As a result, at first there was talk of sabotage allegedly linked to Russia, but there's growing evidence that the outage was actually due to the deplorable condition of the power lines. As happens every year when problems arise in public services since the beginning of the open phase of the war in Ukraine, the Russians. Last year, around the same time, dear Fernando, yes, that time we were the ones affected. The water outage on December 31st, 2024, no more and no less, a good part of the city without water. Now, a power outage. And that's the situation in Europe, dear Fernando. But it doesn't seem much better than the state of the world after today's events, my dear Fernando.
Look, this is tremendous. I'm going to disagree with what you said. You're saying we're on the brink of World War III, but I can guarantee everyone listening, my friends, that you can relax because we're not on the brink of World War III. World War III started a long time ago. I mean, no, we've been in it since 2001. What we're heading toward is a nuclear war, which is something different. You know, if there's a nuclear war, we'll just go do whatever you enjoy most, because that'll be the end of it. But that's exactly where the United States is driving us at full speed. They hit the accelerator with Trump, and right now we're completely off the charts.
Fernando, recapitulo lo sucedido antes de que vos...
Fernando, let me recap what happened before you begin your analysis. About 2 weeks ago, off the coast of Venezuela, the United States tried to board an oil tanker that at the time had no national flag and was named Vela 1. We reported that here that day. Back then, it would have been the third tanker serving Venezuela to be seized, hijacked. 2 seizures had already taken place. 2 weeks ago, they tried to board this tanker, but they couldn't because of the crew's resistance. And a long chase began across the Caribbean Sea, first along the Venezuelan coast and then across the Atlantic Ocean.
Luego del Océano Atlántico. En el medio,
Excuse me, in the meantime, on December 24, no less, the Russian state, the Russian authorities, approved a temporary permit for the oil tanker previously known as Vela 1 to henceforth sail under the Russian flag, under the name Mariner. From that moment on, the sailors themselves, the ship's crew, painted a large Russian flag on one side of the tanker, presenting to the world the news that from then on, this ship would sail under the Russian flag. Well, beyond that, the United States did not abandon the pursuit and finally carried out the boarding today at 3 p.m. Moscow time with the assistance of the United Kingdom at the request of the Americans themselves.
Por pedido de los propios estadounidenses. Horas antes de la noticia de la...
Hours before the news of the boarding broke, when reports of an imminent attack were already spreading through US media, real or not, certain or uncertain. They presented the version, the story, that Russia had dispatched a military submarine, naturally to defend this oil tanker, but that it ultimately had not been able to respond in time, and that this was why the boarding was carried out by the Americans in international waters of the North Sea, near the United Kingdom and Iceland, in that area. For the moment, the Russians reacted by calling for respect toward the Russian crew members of this ship, and naturally issued a complaint, how to put it, a grumble, a statement rejecting this action, but not much more than that.
Pero no mucho más que eso. Esa la situación, es el recuento de lo sabido.
That's the situation. That's the summary of what's known so far. And from this moment on, the analysis begins. I also want to point out that today, the United States itself, according to the authorities of the Southern Command, here on screen the images shared on the Southern Command's X account, I didn't remember that. What clowns? The music. Yes. Okay, turn it off. Well, today they also carried out the boarding and seizure of a 4th oil tanker serving Venezuela. I describe them that way, serving Venezuela, because they often lack the Venezuelan flag. They don't represent Venezuelan ownership, far from it, but they do transport Venezuelan oil to different parts of the world.
Petróleo venezolano a distintos lugares del mundo. Hoy, las Fuerzas Armadas estadounidenses realizaron...
Today, the US Armed Forces carried out the boarding and seizure of this oil tanker. In addition, there are statements from Trump yesterday and from an official named Wright today, saying that the United States, from now on, would seize between 30 and 50 million barrels of Venezuelan oil, based on some kind of transfer agreement or something like that. They didn't present it clearly. It still seems like one of those usual bluffs from this government, an agreement with the supposedly imposed government to forcibly steal 50 million barrels of Venezuelan oil. That's the situation so far, dear Fernando. And from this point on, your analysis, your take on this, my friend.
Pues un desastre, es decir, un desastre y peligrosísimo. Empezaremos por lo menos...
Well, a disaster. I mean, an extremely dangerous disaster. Extremely dangerous. Let's start with the least dangerous, the least disastrous. And that is the issue of the narrative. It's sad, isn't it? The following, that we find out, assuming it's already happened, we don't know, but anyway, because everything, as you rightly pointed out, comes from American sources. Reuters comes out and says, no, a submarine and some ships and so on, Russian ones, have set out to try to defend this ship that's already flying the Russian flag and so on. Then the New York Times comes out and says, no, that's a lie. What Reuters said is false. No one has set out. And the narrative, what about that? Don't the Russians have something to say about it?
¿No tienen algo que decir los rusos al respecto? ¿Desmentirlo o corroborarlo? Quiero decir,
deny it or confirm it. I mean, it's mind-blowing. It's pathetic. I mean, in the end, they're the ones who have absolutely all the space working for them. Because the idiots in Russia don't have a program for, well, I don't even know what to call it. Or they don't run information campaigns. They don't have information systems, which they could have. Obviously, they can't compete with the United States. But even with an official statement coming out and saying something, if you want to confirm that they were going because it suits you, because some ships and a submarine were going, you say so, and if not, you deny it. Have the Russians said anything? No. As far as I know, not so far.
¿Han dicho algo los rusos? No. Que yo sepa hasta el momento, no.
Fernando, en este momento aparecemos.
Fernando, right now it's you and me and a handful of critical channels in a media and cultural war against the enormous, gigantic, mammoth media apparatus of the United States and its leaders. That's the description of the media. That's the sad reality.
Es la triste realidad. Esa es la triste realidad. ¿Qué están haciendo las dos grandes potencias revisionistas?
What are the two so-called revisionist great powers doing against the empire? The Russians and the Chinese. Well, not much, to put it mildly. I mean, they've censored RT, Russia Today, or Sputnik, then set up other channels, other outlets that aren't directly Russian. In other words, spread a narrative. Sure, you have fewer resources than the United States, we know that. But do something, because otherwise, that's bad news. At least make sure your way of seeing things reaches your so-called friendly countries, let's say. But not even that. I mean, first of all, it's unfortunate that they don't have a soft power policy. As I said, they don't have a good or bad policy at all.
Es que no, ya digo, no tienen una política buena ni mala. Es que no la tienen. Pues no sé a qué esperan. Es decir,
they don't have it.
Vamos a ver.
Well, I don't know what they're waiting for. I mean, two, let's see. I don't know if in the end, as I said, we don't know whether they've sent the submarine or not. Who knows? But in any case, they've been chasing this ship for 2 weeks and haven't done anything. The Russians, what are they waiting for? They even painted the little Russian flag and still nothing. I mean, well, I'll add a final reflection on this later. I don't know. I don't get it. I mean, they're defending their own ships against some Anglo-Saxon pirates, the Americans, worthy descendants of Francis Drake, the famous British privateer. Are they pirating one of your ships in international waters? But what is this? I mean, and you're not doing anything. It's all about protesting and only after the fact. At the UN, well, we already know what the UN is good for. Absolutely nothing. You can file as many complaints as you want at the UN, and Mr. Trump uses all those written complaints from the UN. Mr. Trump uses them as toilet paper. We've already... I won't go further into that. International law, the United Nations, all of that is already dead. The United States has destroyed it. This is going nowhere. I mean, this... Forget about it. The UN might still be useful as a discussion forum where a lot can be exchanged, fine, but that's it. Period. That leads to more. I mean, that's a second issue. Then let's imagine, we don't know, but let's imagine that the Russians had actually sent their ships, that they had arrived on time and encountered the American ships. And now what? What happens? Well, we don't know. What would each side have done? Would the Americans have backed down in the face of Russian threats? Would they have responded? That's where we get into a standoff, seeing who backs down first. This is extremely dangerous. This is extremely dangerous.
Esto es peligrosísimo. Esto es peligrosísimo. Y hay un incidente, se hunde un barco ruso o un...
And there's an incident. A Russian or American ship sinks, I don't care which. And then what? What happens after that? What do we do? Escalate. There's no other option. And from there to a nuclear war isn't as far as it seems. Sure, you'd expect they'd try to stop the escalation, but it's not that easy. Once an escalation like that starts, it's not easy to stop it, even if both sides want to. As we all know, it happened with the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was stopped at the very last moment. That is, there was an intention on the part of the Kennedys and Khrushchev to stop it, but there were many interests working against it. So, well, careful. These things can't just be left to chance.
No se pueden dejar así al tuntún. Eso por otra parte. Luego dices,
that's one thing. Then you say, we have a United States that's already out of control. We'll get into why it's out of control and why. Beyond Trump's ferocity and all that, we'll get into all of this and what's behind the Trump show. But anyway, the next point. We're facing an empire that's in absolute urgency, running out of time as an empire. And therefore, all its masks have already fallen. It doesn't even bother to maintain disguises or more or less elaborate narratives. No, it couldn't care less. And Trump says it openly. What interests me about Venezuela is the oil. The rest I couldn't care less about. Just look at how little this bastion of democracy that is the United States cares. It has preferred, after more than 20 years, I don't even know how long it's been now, of Chavista rule, and an opposition that's surely the most incompetent in history. An opposition that has had financial, political, and diplomatic support from the United States and the European Union. I say financial because they directly supported coups, like the one against Chavez back in the early 2000s, for example. In other words, they had everything in their favor and were still incapable of toppling Chavismo. And not only that, but when they were in power for a day and a half or 2 days, I don't even remember anymore, it was a long time ago, while Chavez was in jail, it didn't take them 5 minutes to start stealing and fighting among themselves. That is to say, well, of course, the United States looks at this and says, let's see, not these ones. Maria Corina, I'm very sorry. And on top of that, you've stolen my Nobel Peace Prize. So off you go back home. Why? It says we'd rather have the Chavistas in power. At least they keep the country under control. We don't want the chaos you lot would create through incompetence and corruption. So what does Trump do? Trump says, no, not these ones. Let the current ones stay. Then he carries out this operation we've seen. That is, he launches an attack, destroys several Venezuelan military bases, and this must be said, it's now clearer that he kidnaps President Maduro and takes him away, abducts him. In other words, obviously, for this to succeed, there had to be internal betrayal. That's how these things are. I mean, it came from one or several people, we don't know who, but someone who knew a lot. We know there were CIA operations aimed at this specific plan since at least August of last year. In other words, someone was either bribed, blackmailed, or who knows what. But they provided the information needed to make this possible. Otherwise, this operation would be unfeasible. Completely unfeasible. There's a massive intelligence operation here on the part of the United States. That said, from there on, of course, we're facing a giant with nuclear weapons and a country that has no defensive capability. Let's not fool ourselves. So given that, Venezuela has two options. What do we do now? Or do we stick with the empire? Beyond all the rhetoric that's being said, but anyway, or as he's threatened, because he actually said it, Trump himself, no, if you don't do what I want, we'll send another round of bombings over Maduro. So, well, on one hand, he's telling me, they've also threatened Venezuelan leaders, saying, we've kidnapped this one, but we could just hit you directly instead of kidnapping you. If they kidnap you, at least you're still alive. But the thing is, if they see where you are, they'll send a bomb your way. And besides, they've got, if anything, an even bigger problem, which is that the Americans have no issue committing massacres. They've proven that thousands of times. And now, well, if we have to wipe out Venezuela, we'll wipe it out. However, There's a clear problem. What is the Venezuelan government going to do? Let 10,000, 20,000, 100,000, 200,000 people be killed, only to end up surrendering because there's no other choice? Because they're not going to set foot on the ground, which would be the only way to defeat them or cause them trouble. They've already learned from Iraq and Afghanistan. They're not going to set foot on the ground except for specific special forces operations. The thing is, they're cornered, trapped, really. So of course, they have to give in to blackmail and buy time, like we were saying the other day. Buy time, have Trump shift the focus toward Iran, then have them shift it again somehow, and hopefully he'll get burned by one of these situations, with growing internal conflicts in the United States. Now it's about resisting, but resisting in the smart sense of the word. And if you have to give in, then you give in. Better to give in than let your people be massacred. There's just no other choice. Because we are facing a ruthless imperialist power. So there's no other option. And finally, the following reflection. Let's see. We have to put an end, and I'll explain this in a moment, to the appeasement policies toward the American empire. The appeasement policies of the Allies, well, of the Anglophile side, right? That is, of the Western Allies with Hitler, led to what they led to. The appeasement policies toward the barbarism, the savagery of the American empire, lead to the same kind of outcome. Let's not forget, we've said it here millions of times, that the United States and its European partners interpret strategic prudence as weakness. Here's how it is. They only understand one language, the language of force and power. And let's not forget that Trump and those behind him are deep down neighborhood bullies with nuclear weapons and astronomical military power, but cowards nonetheless. In other words, the more patient you are, the bolder they become. And this can create a perverse effect, which we've pointed out here before. Because you, in order to avoid escalation, since you're a responsible power, don't get into this game of blow and counterblow, that is, of escalating until things get out of hand and we all end up in hell. But precisely to avoid that, you exercise strategic prudence. And as a perverse effect, since they interpret it as weakness, they keep escalating. They keep escalating until we reach a point where you're forced to respond, and from there there's no turning back, and we end up in what you wanted to avoid, a nuclear war. They have to be stopped now, right now. And only two coordinated powers can do that, Russia and China. They have to take on that responsibility, because we're not talking about just another war. Humanity is at stake, plain and simple. This isn't World War II where, no matter how many people were killed, humanity went on. 60 million were wiped out. Well, actually more, but anyway, and here we are. No, and this doesn't mean we should pursue the reckless policies the United States is following. Come on, let's respond by launching some missiles or whatever. No, there are many ways to respond to them. The Chinese set an example when it comes to the economic issue. When Trump got cocky with the tariffs, the Chinese came along and said, "Fine by us, you won't be exporting your grain." Trump backed down. There are many things that could be done that I at least am not seeing. They're destabilizing all the allies they can, both those of the Russians and the Chinese, or anyone more or less aligned with them. We just saw it with Venezuela. They're doing it with many others. We're seeing the war in Thailand, triggered by the ties with the Americans behind them, against Cambodia, a Chinese ally, to destabilize Southeast Asia, which is key for China. We're seeing coups or color revolutions everywhere. First it was in Bangladesh, then in Nepal. Well, in Georgia there have already been 5 or 6 in recent years. Come on, they're used to it by now. In Serbia, some succeed, others don't, but can't you do the same? Can't you hit them where it hurts the most? And obviously in those countries that don't harm you, or where the damage would be minimal. And above all, you can't encourage, and don't tell me they can't, because come on, that's what secret services and intelligence are for. You can't encourage internal conflict in the United States, which is what would save us all.
Que es lo que nos salvaría a todos. Es decir, si Trump tiene que estar enfrentado con los
That is to say, if Trump has to be at odds with the Democrats, sending National Guard troops to restore order in that city, he's threatened the governor of California with doing the same. But anyway, let them fight among themselves. Encourage it. What are they doing? As far as we know, nothing. Maybe they're doing something and we just don't know. What you can't have is a reactive policy. The Americans take the initiative, they do something, and you respond. And on top of that, you respond poorly and weakly at the United Nations. Please, that's useless. Or like what happened with the special military operation. They've been pushing the whole Ukraine issue and all that since 2007, if I'm not mistaken.
Presionando con todo, con el tema de Ucrania y tal, no sé qué. Bueno, en realidad lleva mucho más, pero bueno, mucho más tiempo.
Well, actually, it's been going on for much longer. Once you already have them there, you respond with the special military operation. A poorly designed, poorly prepared, semi-improvised operation. And it turns out the way it turns out, of course. Then you make corrections, and since the United States is a much more powerful force than Ukraine, you're going to win. But the cost will be high, let's not fool ourselves. And in the meantime, the United States, with Trump playing a double game. That is, on one hand, he presents himself as a mediator with the acquiescence of the Russians and says, okay, we accept this pretense because it suits us. But he keeps bleeding the Russians. Let's not forget, he keeps bleeding them. He hasn't cut off intelligence, which is the key thing. So why? Because it suits him. Let's see. I mean, one thing is that Trump doesn't want to confront the Russians directly and so on. And that in the end it's understood that he couldn't care less about Ukraine and that the Europeans should handle it. But anything that weakens his enemies works in his favor, because ultimately he knows that China's main support comes from Russia, mainly energy support and other kinds as well, but especially energy or food related, with the issue of grain, etc. So they're waiting here to take the initiative in what they already know perfectly well is a war, a hybrid war. This is what's not being seen, and this is what they need to start working on now.
Y esto es lo que tienen que ponerse ya. ¿Por qué? Pues sencillamente, porque como está tan ahora mismo, como está
Why?
el imperio ahora mismo,
Well, simply because the way the empire is right now, we don't have much time left,
porque van a meter la pata.
because the Americans are going to mess up.
Metan la pata,
And when they mess up, big time, they're going to force the Russians or the Chinese to respond. And from that point on, it's over. Because the response will have to be so harsh, so forceful in the face of the outrage they're going to commit, that in the end, we'll all end up roasted in a nuclear war. Watch out. I mean, they have to be stopped, these people. And they've already shown it. They're a bunch of bullies, street thugs. The moment you stand up to them, they back down. There can be no appeasement with people like that.
No puede haber contemporización con esta gente. Hay que acabar con Estados Unidos.
We have to put an end to the United States, and that has to be done intelligently, with a clear head. But we need to start taking action, because they're doing all sorts of things. Against the Russians and the Chinese, not just them, but all their allies. Against the Cubans, the Venezuelans, North Korea, even the lukewarm ones like India. So what are we waiting for? Above all, who can actually do it? Because what can you really ask of Venezuela? It's already doing enough just to survive. Now Trump comes along and says, and the Venezuelans won't be able to say no to him. Look, besides, now we're going to do something. Are you going to stop selling them oil or stop letting oil pass through, whatever it is? To the Russians, to the Chinese. The Chinese don't care because they can replace Venezuelan oil. It's roughly 4% of all the oil China buys.
4% de todo el petróleo que compra China. Quiero decir que no es una cantidad grande.
That is to say, it's not a large amount compared to the volume of oil China buys. But for a country for which Venezuelan oil is essential, Cuba, as I've already said, Cuba can't get any oil. What does Trump want to do with Cuba? Starve them, just like in medieval sieges. Well, and what are these others going to do? Nothing. Allies will keep falling away, and the Russians and the Chinese will just stand there with their arms crossed because, look, I understand that Russia isn't the Soviet Union, as I think I said before. That is, Russia has a little over 140 million people, and the Soviet Union had 350 million. It was a power 1,000 times greater than Russia, which already has its hands full with the war in Ukraine, fighting against NATO. But you have to spread yourself out, meaning you're doing things in Africa. You went to Syria. Why in Syria? Because of a deal with the Turks. When you're a nuclear power, Turkey isn't, and you shouldn't care that it's NATO, because NATO isn't going to get involved there. I mean, you didn't bomb Idlib, you didn't destroy Idlib. None of the beheadings by al-Nusra and company would have happened if during all those years they were there causing trouble in the Idlib pocket, it had been wiped out and all the jihadists eliminated. What are they waiting for? I mean, not anymore. Not now. But in the case of Syria, this business of trying to appease, because you can put pressure on Erdogan. Let's not forget that Erdogan is completely dependent, with no alternative, on Russian gas, on the Blue Stream and the Turk Stream. What are they waiting for to play their cards? Nobody knows. Nobody knows. Look, I don't know if you have it there now.
This came from our friends at Faces and Geopolitics. You started off loaded. You started off strong, dear Fernando.
Sure. And there's more he's going to spill.
Let's see. Record this program. Record it. In practically everything, although with some nuances regarding US power. But we can already present and deliberate on this issue. I wanted to present this here first. These are the only recently released images taken from the Mariner, apparently shortly before. This is the image, the photo. Well, these here once again, the ship there, nearby, the US vessel, and the helicopter responsible for the boarding. Fine. I completely agree with you. Fernando, in your analysis of Russia and China, I don't fully share the view that Venezuela now seems completely cornered and that the United States displays overwhelming power. Why? For me, in the United States, a phase began that I would describe as blatant imperialism. In line with the same old imperialism, but now blatant. In fact, blatant because they carry out extrajudicial killings on a daily basis, hijack oil tankers from other countries as if it were nothing, and launch operations to decapitate governments simply because they don't like them. They don't even bother anymore, as they used to offer explanations or justifications. Well, yes, there's the stuff about the drug boats, the cartel of the Suns, but they even abandon those halfway through, don't they? On one hand, yes, drug trafficking, but the next day, well, no, actually we want the oil, my friend.
Oil, what are we going to use it for?
Blatant imperialism. In fact, since Trump came to power in this second term, the supposedly peace-loving president, eager for the Nobel Peace Prize, has already carried out attacks. In Somalia, first of all, still ongoing, he launched the first strike. Then in Yemen, where he had to back down, you'll remember, Fernando.
Yes, of course. They carried out attacks in December in Nigeria. The jihadists do know how to deal with the Americans.
And it carried out attacks in Syria before Venezuela, which means that in just 1 year, Somalia, Yemen, Nigeria, Syria, and Venezuela so far.
I think he also fired off some kind of big shot around there.
Maybe someone forgot about it somewhere. No, but it rings a bell, huh? Anyway, I mean, well, Iran.
Something like, from now on, this is how we govern Venezuela right here. In fact, Trump today, once again.
Have you spoken with her? No, I haven't, but other people. Do you want to?
Nosotros estamos a cargo, esto de hoy, pero ya esto también dicho el
We're in charge of this today, but this had already been said on the very first day, the same day as the attack on Maduro, the kidnapping of Maduro. Right after that came statements from both Trump and Rubio and their loudest officials. Now we want Greenland. And around that same time, they were also going to start an attack on Iran after Netanyahu's visit at the end of the year, driven by the obsession with a new. So yes, blatant imperialism, but also an out-of-control, chaotic imperialism, completely lacking in planning. In fact, I always recall this in all my talks. Until Chávez's death in 2013, maybe 2014, during Maduro's first year, the United States was the main buyer of Venezuelan oil.
Estados Unidos representaba el principal comprador del petróleo venezolano.
Y ahora es el
Y eso
segundo.
generaba
And that generated a very good, it generated profits. It created a beneficial situation for the United States and for Venezuela. From the moment this policy of harassment began, the multinational oil companies in Venezuela started to withdraw, and today the country trades 80% of its oil with China. In addition, Chinese companies arrived in mining and investment, as well as Russian, Belarusian, and Iranian companies. So evidently, this policy of harassment has produced exactly the opposite effect so far. A clear example of strategic error and total lack of planning. If we don't want to look at Venezuela's example, we can then recall the example of Iraq in 2003, the invasion.
Podemos recordar entonces el ejemplo de Irak, 2003, invasión, quien realiza la explotación del petróleo mayoritariamente.
Who is mostly exploiting oil in Iraq today? The Chinese, not the United States. So this blatant imperial power, but also anarchic and uncontrolled, like a boxer on the verge of a knockout, throwing wild punches, extremely dangerous and extremely powerful, no doubt, but out of control, unrestrained, can start craziness like this today, and tomorrow start another, and the day after yet another. In that sense, it doesn't represent a great power aware of its actions with a strategic plan, but rather a rampaging giant in open decline. And this, moreover, creates a vicious circle with increasingly harmful effects on US national interests.
Un círculo vicioso, efectos cada vez más perniciosos para el interés nacional estadounidense. La destrucción del orden internacional.
The destruction of the international order, long a fallacy, is now being openly carried out by the United States. In fact, this clashes with the interests of the United States, because that same country created the international order after World War II. All the laws, the United Nations Charter, the United Nations itself, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, all the Bretton Woods institutions, were established by the United States in its own image. Therefore, this destruction of all those institutions, of that entire international order, this blatant imperialism, stems from weakness, not strength. And with Venezuela, a new phase of negotiations is now beginning. Because in my view, they have already determined, beyond Maduro's threats and so on, that they cannot launch an invasion, as it would lead to disaster.
No pueden comenzar una invasión porque generaría un desastre. No quieren, además, en todas las intervenciones de Estados Unidos.
They also don't want, in all of the United States interventions, as a sign of their weakness, to have any casualties. We attacked Iraq without casualties. We attacked Yemen without casualties. We attacked Venezuela without casualties. If one wants to conquer a place, to control a place, it's impossible to do that without casualties. Impossible without boots in the mud. And they don't want that. Yes, they could start another attack against Venezuela, maybe, but the obvious traitors, or the obvious deals in Venezuela, or the obvious surprise of that first attack, all disappear in a second attack. And Trump doesn't want Maria Corina. Venezuelans don't want her. Nobody wants her. They could try to decapitate the leadership again, kidnap Delcy Rodriguez. I don't think they could do that anymore either. But in any case, who would?
Para mí eso ya tampoco podrían, pero en todo caso, ¿y quién? Entonces comenzaría Diosdado Cabello. Después Diosdado Cabello.
Then Diosdado Cabello would begin. After that, Diosdado Cabello again, another one, and so on. So here a negotiation inevitably begins, with Venezuela forced to negotiate, but with the United States as well. In a context where today a woman, an observer, has been killed at the hands of ICE, the agency in charge of deportations in the United States. A tremendous internal situation. And with elections coming up soon, then, yes, a very dangerous giant, a shameless giant, but in a context of extremely rapid decline. And I wouldn't describe it as a powerful giant, but rather as a giant in free fall, Fernando, especially in relation to Venezuela. That's perhaps my only nuance, largely in line with your analysis.
Yo estoy de acuerdo
Aunque
contigo.
en línea, en gran medida en línea con tu análisis.
Si yo estoy de acuerdo contigo, por eso es peligroso. Si Estados
Yes, I
Unidos
agree with
todavía
you.
fuera una
That's why it's
potencia
dangerous.
imperial,
If the United States were still a strong imperial power without problems, well, it could more or less stabilize. The problem is that, since it's in decline, I've said it many times, the United States is a power in irreversible decline. That is, the problem is that it's a nuclear power and could cause chaos. That's the problem. It's very dangerous precisely because it's weak. And because it's weak, it resorts to force. What do all declining empires do? They resort to force.
Los imperios en decadencia, tirar de la fuerza. Pues ya no pueden hacer otras cosas, de la fuerza bruta.
Well, they can't do anything else anymore, only use brute force. Indeed, they can't invade places. They've already shown that in Iraq and Afghanistan. Putting boots on the ground is not an option for them. But they can bomb this sinister guy and throw a country into chaos like they did with Libya. And since they have no scruples, they'll do it without hesitation. And there's the blackmail they're using against the Venezuelan government. Whoever doesn't accept my terms, well, another round of bombings. I don't care because you can't do anything. That is, it doesn't matter to me. If necessary, I'll do like in Panama.
Yo hago como en Panamá. Arraso un barrio como el del Chorrillo y tal.
I wipe out a neighborhood like El Chorrillo and so on, and I kill. But they can't. The destruction, but there Venezuela has a card to play, the oil card. And if they create total chaos, even the destruction of the oil, they won't be able to restart oil production, which means the fantasy of this attack, and, in exchange for it, a reward for the attack disappears.
Es que no va por ahí. A ver,
That's not the point. Look, the issue of oil is complicated. The United States doesn't want Venezuela's oil. Well, okay, there's a small part, that is lighter oil and all that. But the famous Orinoco Belt, where there are roughly 300 billion barrels of oil, is enormous. That's what makes Venezuela the country with the largest reserves in the world.
El país con las mayores reservas del mundo. Eso es un petróleo de muy difícil extracción, porque estamos hablando de
That's a very difficult oil to extract because we're talking about both those located in Ohio, around Lake Michigan, for the ultra-heavy oil from Canadian tar sands, and the refineries in Texas. And I saw some charts about this before. Oil imports, although the United States has lower overall imports due to the use of fracking, have seen a very large increase in heavy oil imports in recent years. Why? Because US refineries, including Citgo, a refinery in the United States, until recently owned by Venezuela and just taken away a month ago by a court ruling, all of them process heavy oil, which is different from shale oil, the oil extracted through hydraulic fracturing, or fracking. So yes, they do want Venezuelan oil.
Sí quieren el petróleo venezolano,
Sí, si no digo que no lo quieran. No digo que no lo quieran.
Yes, I'm not saying they don't want it. I'm not saying they don't want it. What's happening here is the following, as you rightly pointed out. That is, the United States has been able to dramatically increase its oil production in recent years thanks to shale oil. That shale oil is an ultralight crude, the complete opposite of Venezuela's. So what do? They mix it and produce something more or less similar to what would be a quality crude like Saudi Arabia's. From that, they get diesel, which is the key to all of this. Because trucks run on diesel, ships move with diesel, it's the key. Diesel can't be produced in just any refinery or from just any type of crude. That's also important. So what happens?
Esto también es importante. Entonces, ¿qué pasa? Es decir, ellos saben, y se lo han dicho.
That is, they know, and they've said it, it's public knowledge and all, that the big oil companies have said that exploiting the Orinoco Belt, meaning actually starting to extract barrels, would take about 10 years. They don't want it for now. They want it for some time in the future. In other words, they want to secure it. It's like having a warehouse, to put it simply. They want to have the warehouse under control for when they need to draw from it, because they know that right now it's extremely expensive. And in fact, right now, the American oil companies are putting pressure, saying, no, getting involved here, but this is way too expensive, it's not profitable. That is, new infrastructure would have to be built, it's far from the sea, many things. So no, but they still want to have it there. Why? Because for now they can keep going even though they've hit the ceiling with Canada's oil sands. That's also an ultra-heavy crude, which they mix with the one from hydraulic fracturing. But they know that in the next decade it's going to start running out because the Canadian wells have already reached their limit. They can't produce anymore and production will start to decline if it hasn't already. So they need to have that reserve. And besides, with this, let's not forget, they're taking oil away from China. Let's never forget this, the number one enemy.
El enemigo número uno. Todo al final está dirigido contra China.
In the end, everything is directed against China, because what the United States is interested in is getting rid of whoever is going to replace it, preventing that from happening. Venezuela is not a rival. That is to say, neither Europe nor, any African country. No. The problem is China. By attacking Venezuela, they're attacking Chinese interests. As you rightly pointed out, they need that extra heavy crude. I mentioned it elsewhere too. But that extra heavy crude is needed to mix with other types of oil for their refineries, with lighter crudes and so on. In other words, what they're doing is, little by little, destroying, encircling, and taking over the resources that China needs, and either keeping them directly or indirectly, throwing the country into chaos and leaving it in ruins, or provoking proxy wars to destabilize it. This is what they're doing, and for now, they're doing it quite well. Despite that erratic nature and all that, yes, it's true they're improvising more and more. Let's not forget that Trump doesn't come up with ideas. This has been done for him. Trump isn't the one running the United States. It's the elites who are in charge, the ones behind the scenes, and they're telling Trump what he has to do. Trump is the public face, the one who shows up, the one who puts on the show. But he doesn't design the policies himself. He doesn't have the sense for that. Others design the policies for him. So yes, it's quite clear and consistent. Another thing is that they make a lot of mistakes, among other reasons, because Americans, one of their main flaws is that they're very arrogant, and so they always underestimate other countries. That's why they lose so many wars and so on. No, we'll take care of this in no time. But no, you won't take care of it in no time because you haven't properly assessed your own capabilities. What I mean is, that's the danger. The danger is that, since we're dealing with a power in irreversible decline, this is going to stop being an empire one way or another. Well, in the bad way, because the good way is impossible. So we have to start doing something, because if not, with one of those wild swings thrown by a boxer who's half groggy and no longer knows where to go, they could start a nuclear war. That's the problem.
Ay, compañero.
Oh, comrade, more on this issue. Over here, Trump's post from a few hours ago saying,
Trump, hace algunas horas.
Well, one thing now. Are you going to talk more about the issue of the oil tankers?
A little bit, yes, about that supposed agreement. Why?
No,
I'm saying it so we can see that in the end. Look, this is very Russian. It just came out recently. Go ahead. Also, on the friendly channel, Guerra Segre Politica, follow it. You all know they're constantly putting out news. It came out that the Vice President of the Defense Committee, Alexei Zhuravlyov, well, I'm pronouncing it terribly, something like that. The Vice President of the Defense Committee of the State Duma, the Russian Parliament, said the following: this, referring to the ship, is pure piracy. The capture of a civilian vessel by the U.S. armed fleet is in essence the same as an attack on Russian territory. And he's absolutely right. After all, the oil tanker was sailing under our state flag. Without a doubt, we must respond to this firmly and swiftly. Our military doctrine, in response to this, even allows for the use of nuclear weapons. Moreover, according to the available information, there was a Russian submarine and other military vessels of ours near the ship, which should have acted. Now let's clarify. This is being said by a man who, yes, is the vice chairman of the Defense Committee and all that. And sure, he's influential, but it doesn't matter. It's a bit like when Dmitry Medvedev speaks. He can say whatever he wants, but on this matter, the final word always belongs to Putin. And this is very typical. Russian parliamentarians come out with Mari Morena, who's from the hardline faction. But I mean, be careful, because in the end we're going to find that the Russians are getting angrier and angrier, the hardliners are gaining more strength, and in the end Putin will have no choice but to do something like this. And then we'll have messed things up. I mean, Russians are very much like, we endure, we have a lot of patience, until the others get overconfident and say, nah, they'll never respond, they don't really have a red line. And in the end, they do have a red line. What's happening is that it's a red line, but not the one you think. I mean, if that red line is crossed without realizing it, then we're in trouble. No, I'm just saying this to point out that right now in Russia, we're talking about someone with a lot of influence. In other words, there's a huge debate about how to respond. So it's not like what we're discussing here and all that, but rather you have the vice chairman of the State Duma's Defense Committee saying that, if necessary, nuclear weapons should be used. We're playing with fire. Or rather, the United States is playing with fire.
Here's what Trump posted today. I am pleased to announce that the provisional authorities of Venezuela will deliver 30. Oh, for crying out loud. Sometimes he's no fool. Definitely no fool. Yes, it's on Trump's own platform, and sometimes with that IP control, the address and all. I am pleased to announce that the provisional authorities of Venezuela will deliver between 30 and 50 million barrels of high-quality, authorized oil to the United States. This oil will be sold at its market price, and I, as President of the United States, will control that money to ensure it is used for the benefit of the Venezuelan people and the United States. I have asked the Secretary of Energy, Chris Wright, to implement this plan immediately. It will be transported in storage vessels directly to U.S. unloading docks. Thank you for your attention. This is the initial announcement, without many more details than this. Immediately afterward, Rubio, over here, with something else to say about it. The agreement we made with PDVSA of Venezuela. Understand that it's solid. Understand that they cannot move their oil.
Está firme, entiendan que no pueden mover su petróleo.
Generating any revenue from their oil right now. They can't move it.
No están generando.
They're not generating any income from their oil. They can't move it unless we allow them to, because we have sanctions in place and we're enforcing a quarantine.
Last night, Secretary Wright will have more to say on it today.
It's enormous pressure. The president said it for the first time yesterday, and will say more about it in the coming hours.
And we feel very positive that not only will that generate revenue that will be used to the benefit of the Venezuelan people, and we're ensured that that's what the...
Y esto va a generar beneficios para la población venezolana.
And this is going to generate benefits for the Venezuelan population, and we are working on it. This gives us great interest and a strong ability to control this situation. For me, Fernando, and here's my earlier point, they undertook this madness without much planning for the day after, expecting a collapse in Venezuela. In fact, all the military exercises carried out by them, the war games, those military simulations in the United States, according to the US press itself, determined that an action of this kind, involving the kidnapping of Maduro and attacks on various locations, would immediately trigger internal disputes, street protests, and above all, the end of the Bolivarian regime in Venezuela.
No presenciamos eso ni de cerca.
We haven't seen anything like that, not even close. And now the improvisations begin, like this supposed agreement with PDVSA, which hasn't even been mentioned so far by Delcy Rodriguez or by any Venezuelan authorities. On the other hand, situations, well, this on one hand, a phantom agreement. On the other, situations like the one yesterday, involving someone increasingly present, Stephen Miller, one of the most visible figures in the US government. If I'm not mistaken, the Deputy Chief of Staff. Well, in one of Trump's appearances, and Rubio's too, they introduced him when asked, "So, what now? Elections?" And Marco Rubio replied, "Elections."
Elecciones. Y Marco Rubio respondió, ¿elecciones? ¿Qué? Elecciones nada.
What? Ha ha. Aha, there's nothing. Well, you're supposedly in control. But then, in what way is it control? And they answered kind of off the cuff. Oh, well, we put together a team, and Stephen Miller is part of that team, that interim government, all improvised. In Mexico, they'd call that Cantinflea, right? And here, a CNN journalist asks a question outside the scope of the press conferences. Again, this damned platform. Damned platform. Well, this is Stephen Miller's response after those statements to the journalist. To the very question, the simple question, well, you're supposedly in charge of this interim government. What exactly is your role?
Este gobierno interino, ¿cuál es verdaderamente su tarea? Y atención a la respuesta, ¿eh?
Stephen, you were part of that group.
And pay attention to the response.
His staff that is running Venezuela.
Stephen,
you're part of that select group that, according to the president, is now in charge of Venezuela. What's your specific task?
Exactly, are your day-to-day
Exactly. What are your day-to-day responsibilities?
The President of the United States has asked Secretary...
The President of the United States asked the Secretary of State, Rubio, to lead this process. But there are many more elements involved, such as energy policy and military policy. That's why it's a large team with many people.
Por eso es un gran equipo de muchas personas, todos están trabajando muchísimo y muy bien.
Everyone is working incredibly hard and doing a great job. But Stephen, what exactly are you doing? And he replies, when pressed for an answer, I'm not very good at talking about myself. He's humble. But I'm part of this team. Well,
pero soy parte de este equipo. Bueno.
He's humble. He doesn't seek the spotlight.
Sí, claro, una improvisación, Fernando, total, absoluta.
A total, absolute improvisation, Fernando. More and more, Fernando, I get the feeling that these guys made a blunder, a miscalculation, within the context of everything we've talked about before. You know, this blatant imperialism, these blows from a giant in decline, and here they went ahead, started this madness, whispering in Trump's ear, and now they find themselves in a situation where they can't quite figure out which way to go. From one standpoint, of course, regarding Venezuela, the United States is showing a position of strength, but with total anarchy, chaos, and disorganization. I keep getting that feeling, although, well, it's debatable, of course, right?
Discutible, naturalmente, ¿no?
Yes, I agree. I mean, these people improvise a lot. Or rather, more than that. It's not something new. It goes way back, at least to the Clinton era, at least, so as not to go even further back. But what happens? Bush comes along and says, come on, let's invade Venezuela. Let's invade Iraq. And in the end, they're defeated and kicked out. But of course, they've taken 1 million Iraqis down with them. That's the problem. I mean, if they had actually planned properly what it meant to go into Iraq, did they really have a government with at least some popular support, one that wasn't just the Kurdish side as a substitute, a replacement for Saddam Hussein? They didn't. They hadn't planned for the post-war period. This is very typical of the United States. They don't plan for the aftermath. They invade or attack, destroy, kill Gaddafi, Saddam Hussein, whoever, and then what? But they do it anyway. I mean, that's the problem, the disaster they create. You've wrecked a country that still hasn't recovered and killed 1 million Iraqis.
Agreed. Now, the international situation is quite different today than it was in 2003, during the invasion of Iraq, isn't it?
pero quiero decir, el problema es que han aprendido. O sea,
Yeah, but I mean, the problem is that they've learned. I mean, look, let's make sure this is clear, okay? This obviously caused tremendous suffering among the Venezuelan population. But if they had invaded, the chances that the guerrilla forces or whatever was organized, the Venezuelan militias, would have to confront the United States would have caused a lot of damage to the U.S., and they would have to think twice. It's true that many Venezuelans would have died, because this doesn't just stop, but they don't want to make the blunder of a new Afghanistan, a new Iraq. Even the dumbest of the Americans have already learned that 20 years of war to remove the Taliban, and then end up putting the Taliban back after 20 years of war. Well, come on, that's the last thing we need. 20 years of war against Chavismo. We get rid of the Chavistas only to end up putting the Chavistas back again. I mean, of course.
Now, Fernando, regarding the suffering of the Venezuelan people as something irrelevant to the United States, someone might respond, well, actually, the Venezuelan diaspora, the Venezuelan opposition, wants what's best for the Venezuelan people and stands up for the suffering Venezuelans. Pay attention to what this lady in Uruguay said, as part of the Venezuelan diaspora. Not all of them are the same. Not all of the opposition is the same. Surely not everyone thinks this way. But a good number do. Pay attention to this lady.
Yes, the price we all have to pay as Venezuelans is our oil. Yes, but maybe we'll be much better off, you know? So yes, now maybe a lot of people are going to die, or not. Hopefully not. Hopefully not, but it's the price that has to be paid. And sometimes, please, thank you very much.
How can this be the problem in Latin America? Well, in Spain too, Fernando. A part of the population has no love for their homeland, traitors to the nation, and on top of that, incredibly stupid. The oil given away, people dead. We're going to be better off. We're going to be better off. No, sweetheart, no, they don't want you. In fact, immediately after Maduro was overthrown, amid the celebrations of the Venezuelan diaspora in Miami and elsewhere, deportations of those people began.
But of course, no. I mean, these people, because I don't know where this would be, but anyway, I mean, in Uruguay, that's it. In Uruguay.
A Venezuelan woman in Uruguay.
Sure, I mean, well, one of two things. Either she's very stupid, well, it's not incompatible, or she's just very stupid, plain and simple. Let's see how I can say this without swearing. Look, either you have a total lack of empathy toward those you claim to defend and care about, the Venezuelan people, or something's seriously wrong. I mean, you're willing to let as many Venezuelans as necessary be killed just so your so-called ideology can prevail. And hey, if the oil has to go to the Americans, if many have to die, if millions have to die, whatever it takes, no problem. These people have so much hatred inside them that they end up saying these kinds of outrageous things. I mean, look, there's one thing that's clear, and I said this the other day on a show. Let's see. There are all these people, and sure there are some, who simply don't agree with Chavismo, but are against the atrocities committed by the United States, right? I mean, there's all kinds. But to those people, I would say, look, the oil, you're not going to see it. The United States will keep it, and you'll end up poorer. You won't get anything from what they take there. And besides, tell me, give me one historical example where the United States carried out a military intervention or provoked a regime change that actually brought about democracy. Never. Not ever. American interventions don't make things better for you. They make them worse. And they're not going to bring you democracy under any circumstances. In Iraq, they brought democracy. I can't stop laughing. In Afghanistan, where we all know there's a model democracy. In Vietnam, what a democracy they brought there. I don't know, in Panama, well, with all due respect to Panamanians, that old saying that Panama isn't a country with a canal, but a canal with a country, Well, it's true. I mean, where have the Americans ever brought democracy when they've invaded somewhere? Someone tell me. That is to say, with which I say, no. But look, if in the case, hopefully not, that Chavismo were to lose, meaning the Americans went in there, wiped everyone out and so on, killed half the population, those kinds of things. And that, well, it's been costly. They've taken away the oil, they've killed half the population, and you'll find that you won't have democracy or human rights or any of that. I mean, of course, no, these people are driven by absolute hatred and also by interests. I don't know this particular lady, I don't know her, but here in Spain, there are a lot of Venezuelans with money. Yes, no, but Fernando, maybe people with higher purchasing power? Yes, but also a lot of people without a cent.
Sin un centavo, repitiendo esta cantinela porque la doctrina nazi.
Repeating this same spiel because of the Nazi doctrine all the time. Oh, if you side with the United States, then you'll be part of the first world and you'll look like you're swimming in dollars, living a life like in American TV shows. And these people swallow that, believe that. And then, in that mix of idiocy and malice, I'd call it, in Buenos Aires slang, this girl is a mix of an idiot and a bastard both at once. But well, maybe that's not understandable to everyone. Let's call it idiocy and malice. I think that's clear enough. Well, and they regurgitate this nonsense like, well, if Venezuelans die, let them die. We'll hand over the oil, but we'll be better off. Let me present something if you want, Fernando. That said, I admit there's censorship on the channel, because this is indefensible. But this guy, one of the intellectuals of campism, Mr. Andrew Tate, one of the most famous bloggers of the MAGA movement, sometimes also taking part in those celebrity boxing matches. And there are the things this man said on his channel, not on YouTube, if I remember correctly. It's banned on YouTube. For the naive ones who listen to this, pay attention. I'm completely against us trying to govern Venezuela. And Trump said, now we're going to govern. So to hell with that, right? We're not going to govern anything. Let's steal everything from them and get out of there. Let's steal their oil and leave.
That's all.
Let's take his crap, right? Everything. His stuff, literally. And let's go.
Fucking leave.
Now, I know many of you are saying,
well, actually, quite a lot of Venezuelans are glad Maduro's gone.
I know many of you are saying that a lot of Venezuelans are happy now that we got rid of Maduro, because many of them were mistreated. I want to make something clear. I don't want to say the insult in English, because that's when they censor us. But not all that F, like damn, no, fucking, blah, blah, blah. I want to make something clear. I don't give a shit. I couldn't care less, said in a much cruder way. I couldn't care less what Venezuelans think about anything, absolutely anything. Well, I couldn't care less whether Venezuelans are doing well or not. Well, for quite a while now, right?
The first image, when I saw it, I was already taken aback. And this brute, this individual, I was going to say human being, but let's just leave it at being, plain and simple, which would be more fitting. This brute. I mean, you say he's got quite a following over there in the United States, like huge millions of followers or something like that, right?
Well, I almost had a slip. Yeah. I mean, he's really famous. You know, the communicators, I mean, like that, with that style, shouting with stuff in the background. Yeah, the helmet, the glasses, the stomach. Yeah. For some reason, they generate a lot of attraction. They win over a lot of people's hearts here too, on YouTube, shouting. And this guy, within Trumpism, is one of the most important spokesmen, a real intellectual. You took the words right out of my mouth.
About the rabid ones. I was thinking the same thing. I mean, dude, how are the current intellectuals in the United States doing? Their thinking is amazingly deep.
Noam
Chomsky on one side, Jeffrey Sachs on the other, and this guy naked like that, wearing a war helmet and sometimes with an M16 right in front of his face.
I found that guy who showed up during the Capitol takeover funnier. The one wearing that Viking and shaman-style helmet and all that. He was funnier, I think. I don't know if I should even bring it up, but anyway. But of course, Noam Chomsky or Jeffrey Sachs wouldn't stand a chance in a debate if they had to talk with such a brilliant and lofty intellectual as this one, right? I mean, yes. But clearly, they wouldn't stand a chance, that's obvious. Anyway, this is a symptom, of a society, a symptom that unfortunately we're also suffering from here in Europe.
Síntoma que por desgracia ya padecemos también en Europa, ¿eh? Quiero decir, no llegamos todavía a estas cosas tan estrafalarias.
We haven't gotten to those outlandish things yet, but everything will come out. But it's a sign of how far social role models have gone. Well, like the kind we just saw. Of course, let's see. At this point, as I say, if it's about money, hey, whatever you say, Ezekiel, if necessary, I'll take my shirt off one day. I'll put on a helmet. I've got one lying around somewhere.
This guy's been hitting the gym harder than you, Fernando.
Well, but what else?
Maybe even better. Maybe better.
Sure, I hang some necklaces and stuff around here, a few silly things. I start saying nonsense, putting on voices like, well, I don't know, how's it going? You know what I mean? You make one of those pauses, a silence to build anticipation, and you say, well, I say that, yeah, this is really easy to do, huh?
For this, it's not necessary. Fernando, regarding the situation in the United States, getting closer and closer to, we've brought up several times the idea of the possibility of a civil war. Many mocked us. How exaggerated. But the United States seems to be going through a process of internal disintegration. Terrible.
This happened the other day too.
This is a girl protesting the other day at a demonstration against the attacks on Venezuela, not because she supports Maduro, but because of the use of US taxpayers' money for a new war, a new invasion with no real benefit, especially considering the tremendous problems in the United States that require urgent attention.
To commit these war crimes. It is also
And this has happened.
to stand against the Trump regime.
Well, it's our responsibility, the people's responsibility, not to let them use our resources for more wars and to stand up against Trump's arbitrariness. The government is committing crimes, both here in the United States and in Venezuela. And there, the news program host, you can see in the background of the interview that they were waiting for her. And as soon as the segment ended, as soon as the lights and cameras were turned off, 2 local police officers from Grand Rapids immediately arrested her. And there, the officers said they were arresting her for obstructing a public place and disobeying a police order.
A police officer, you can see as she's taken away.
Look, it's clear. You can see that street was full of people and that they were blocking the way. It's obvious.
Fernando, beyond the joke, both in Europe and in the United States, the distance to an open dictatorship.
Smaller and smaller. What I don't understand is how even after seeing these things, which are already commonplace, it's normal. Someone can still think that the United States is a democracy. Even a liberal democracy. Huh? We're not even asking for that. Freedom of speech. A woman who wasn't calling for Trump's assassination, right? No. She was simply saying, well, I'm against this atrocity, this whatever.
Camera off. Peaceful.
Well, look, you can't be against this. We're taking her. And besides, the poor girl, well, she just reacts like that. No, what do you mean like that? She has to be handcuffed. She's very dangerous. Just look at her. That's how dangerous this poor woman supposedly was.
The poor girl, yes.
The poor girl, meaning extremely dangerous. I mean, come on. But Giuliani isn't considered dangerous. The head cutter, no. That one gets the red carpet treatment because he's supposedly been a lifelong pacifist. Meanwhile, this poor girl who's just expressing her opinion, a pretty ordinary opinion, I mean, she's not asking for Trump to be beheaded or for bombs to be planted all over the United States. No. Well, we've seen it. Arrested. So, well, at best, a night or a day in jail and then a fine, at best, meaning who knows what's going to happen to her. But this is the true face of freedom of speech, of democracy, and all those stories they keep telling us about. Well, you know, the famous separation of powers from Montesquieu. I'm in favor of that, but it's never really existed, and even less so now. Anyway, look, I find it really funny, all those people who used to criticize communism, understanding communism as real socialism, meaning what existed in the Soviet Union, who said, no, it doesn't meet, theory and practice don't match, it doesn't hold up. Fine, I'll give you that, I accept it. But then, let them tell me how the theory and practice of liberal democracies fit together, or of the capitalist market, for that matter. I mean, it doesn't work anywhere. There has never been a free market. You only have to look at the example, perhaps the most glaring one, of the so-called free market in the international defense industry, where that idea doesn't even cross their minds. Well, we have to tell people this. Look, I understand that. I don't know. I mean, we all have our own problems and our own stuff. And I get that, I really do. But the least we can do is stop swallowing these fairy tales already, these awful stories. Like that we live in a democracy, freedom of speech, the rule of law. Oh, come on, please. It's one thing if we can't do anything about it, or maybe we can, or maybe not. Fine, but at least let's not believe these laughable narratives. Honestly, it's pathetic, and it's only going to get worse. I mean, we're seeing this both in the United States and in Europe, and it's happening fast.
Before we wrap up and present the last segment, Fernando, I want to do a bit of self-promotion. For example, about our latest reaction on our Patreon channel. I'm mentioning it also to clear up any doubts about how it works. On Patreon, our channel already has 500 subscribers. Our first reaction, our first analysis, was about Mr. Sergei Karaganov and an interview he gave to Glendiz some time ago. With a preview of the introduction, the first 10 minutes, published both on our Patreon channel and here on our YouTube channel. And here's the video of our reaction from the other day. No, not this. I'll move it forward more easily here. Ah, well, another window opens, unfortunately. Here, our Patreon channel is available to all of you. What we can't show here, we show there. In this latest reaction, in this last analysis, we did an analysis of a debate among 4 experts on Zionism, 4 scholars dedicated to studying the rise and transformations of Zionism, including its current phase. More than interesting, Fernando, even with a discussion about the messiahs in the 1st century alongside Jesus Christ. That's the level of our analyses.
That's how annoying I am.
Don't miss out. The monthly subscription fee, with access to all content, is €10, at least in Europe, or the equivalent in dollars or in each of your national currencies. You can also give someone a gift. We'll be constantly posting reactions, analyses, and commentary there, because what we can't show here due to censorship, we'll show there. Everyone's invited, right? That's right. What else? What else, Fernando?
Well, let's see. We have to talk about the funny part. The funny part is always Europe. Can I say one short thing first, Fernando, about this?
Yes, the thing about Greenland. Oh, this is something that isn't. This is Senator Rick Scott from the United States saying the following. Attention. I'm so proud of what the president did, and Marco Rubio, and Pete Hegseth, and our military, and Maria Corina Machado, of course, as well. Very proud of all of them.
María Corina Machado, naturalmente, también. Muy orgulloso de todos ellos.
What they did in Venezuela is going to change Latin America.
And what they did in Venezuela is going to change Latin America.
Of changing Venezuela, then we're going to fix Cuba.
Este es el comienzo del cambio en Venezuela.
This is the beginning of change in Venezuela. After that, we'll fix Cuba, then Nicaragua, and after that, a new president in Colombia. Democracy is coming to the hemisphere.
La democracia está llegando al hemisferio.
La democracia impuesta a garrotazos.
Democracy imposed by force. That is, by bombing. In other words, let's see. Do you want democracy? Yes. Well, hold on, I'll throw a bomb at you or hit you with a club. That's how the United States understands democracy. It's always been that way. But anyway, no, remember that, can't recall who said it, whether it was Trump himself or Marco Rubio, one of those guys, who also said, no, but of course now, Colombia, Nicaragua, Cuba, and so on, and Greenland. Because now Greenland too, of course. It's also part of America. And that's when the whole thing turns into a joke, because of course, the Europeans' tough response. Well, I've read the official Danish statements, and they're practically pleading, like saying, look, take it, steal it or invade it or whatever. We'll not invade it, better if we just give it to you, but make it look like we didn't. At least keep up appearances. And today, the NATO Secretary General came out saying, as always, Stoltenberg, what a guy, saying that Greenland is open to discussing the deployment of additional U.S. troops on its territory. And then one of those people came out, I don't remember who. At the White House, they said, the United States doesn't have enough presence in the Arctic. Greenland is needed to have more control. In other words, forget about military presence. They're basically saying, we'll take it. Stoltenberg, you're missing the point. And well, the Danes are scared to death right now. And the Europeans are saying, this is really funny, that they're going to defend the Danes in Euroland. It can be an indescribable spectacle to see how NATO's great godfather crushes, well, not even crushes, humiliates, really, because there's no need to crush. He humiliates a NATO member called Denmark, taking Euroland away from it. And of course, let there be no doubt, the Europeans are not going to do absolutely anything, nothing real. They'll respond to these things, but honestly, if anyone thinks the Europeans are going to stand up to the United States, they have serious psychological problems. So that's where we are. It seems that now, let's see, Trump isn't content with doing just one thing at a time. He attacks Venezuela, now he wants to take Greenland again, he attacks the Danes. We're seeing that, unfortunately, the next war with Iran is just around the corner. In fact, it was being said that Netanyahu had asked Trump for the green light, and Trump had given it to him to wage a war against Hezbollah. What was the goal of this? To attack Hezbollah. Since Iran itself had said that a war against Hezbollah would be a war against Iran, and Iran would have no choice but to intervene. And that way, indirectly, they would achieve a war against Iran. Right now, with all the chaos of demonstrations and protests, by the way, with a lot of disinformation coming from the West about it, they're seeing the possibility of going after Hezbollah and directly, once again, after Iran. But anyway, one way or another, I'm afraid we're going to have a war before too long.
Iran or Greenland first, Fernando? Your prediction.
Well, the thing is, for Iran, you'd need a war. In Greenland's case, no. It depends. In Greenland's case, it depends on how he wakes up one day. Yeah, it depends on how he wakes up one day and says, today I want Greenland. But still, no. And then all you'd have to do is go there to all of them, to the Danes and so on, to the Prime Minister, and say, well, look, I want it. Find a way to, I don't know, maybe hold an independence referendum, because the Greenlanders do want independence. And then from there, maybe hold another referendum, for example, I don't know, in which they vote to join the United States. Because the key here is that, for that reason, Rutte's deal, trying to fix things, ends up looking worse.
Intentando ahí arreglar las cosas queda peor. Aquí no se trata solo de poner.
This isn't just about setting up bases or taking their resources, which of course they already have. And American companies are also exploiting those resources. No, it's not just that. We're already talking about the exploitation of Arctic resources. The Arctic. And that means taking a big bite. If Greenland becomes U.S. territory, taking a big bite out of the Arctic's resources. So we're not just talking about that anymore. That's also why they want Canada, because if you take the Arctic, Alaska, Greenland, and Canada, then it's practically divided between the Russians and the Americans. That's why it's not just about, that's why when they say, no, Rutte's an idiot, no, you can set up as many bases as you want. But that's not what this is really about.
Puedes poner todas las bases que quieras, que no se trata solo de eso, que es que me lo quiero quedar porque eso me da, digamos.
The thing is, I want to keep it because that gives me, let's say, legitimacy to claim a good part of the Arctic. First, I'll take Greenland, which is the easy part, and then I'll try with Canada. That'll be harder, of course. But this is key. This is key, and well, this no longer depends. The Europeans have come out saying nonsense about how they're going to defend Denmark and all that, but they're not going to defend it at all. Does anyone really think Scholz, Macron, and company are going to send troops to defend Denmark if it's occupied, with a population of about 56 or 57,000 inhabitants? That's not a problem, with no capacity or intention to resist. Besides, if they want to keep it, they'll keep it.
Fernando, querido, sobre el cierre, quería presentar...
Fernando, my dear, before we wrap up, I wanted to show some images about Europe, about the situation in this city, here in Berlin. There are still dark houses, 25,000 households, that's the correct figure, without electricity since Saturday. In some areas, they've already managed to restore power, but otherwise, a blackout across much of the city of Berlin. 25,000 households without light. Luckily, the temperature is high, right? At the moment, -10.
Por suerte la temperatura elevada, ¿no? En este momento -10.
How nice.
Menos de técnica, -10 bajo cero y para mañana...
Less technique, -10 below zero. And for tomorrow, if I remember the forecast correctly, they predicted -12 if I'm not mistaken. Temperature-wise, so the wind chill will probably be even lower. While I'm presenting this, Fernando, a quick comment about the harsh criticism from many people against my participation on Pedro Baños' channel. I honestly find it striking that many rejected the participation itself, not my views, for some reason, because Pedro Baños this, Pedro Baños that. Ambassador Zorrilla also took part. I take part in every outlet that invites me, and I always present my views.
Me llaman y presento siempre mis posiciones. Si alguien realizase una crítica porque reacomodo...
If someone were to criticize me for readjusting my positions or presenting a different view from my own here on the channel or in some media outlet, then yes, logically, that would be a justified criticism. But just for participating... Back then, I presented the same positions on Deutsche Welle and Telesur at the same time. Well, that led to my censorship on Deutsche Welle. But one should take part everywhere and establish dialogue and conversation, even with people who have ideas different from one's own. Supposedly in this case, honestly, I can't determine that. Well, that's it, folks. I take part in all media, always with my own position. And if at some point there's a disagreement about something, I present it respectfully, as long as others are respectful toward me as well. The other day, the show with Pedro Baños. By the way, very good. But anyway, also, there's something else. The struggle is good and necessary.
Programs like this one, like other YouTubers and so on, We're here making noise and fighting to offer a different perspective on what's going on. But if besides being here, let's say in our own stronghold, in our castle, you can go and fight them in other media outlets, taking them down, damn, that's what we'd want. In fact, they don't usually call us. I'll never be invited to any of the official TV channels in Spain, whether private or public. Why?
And if they called you, would you gladly take part?
Of course, and it would cause quite a stir. I was about to say something stronger. But anyway, of course I'd confront them. The other day on a small media outlet, I took part in a program with Juan Antonio Aguilar, where there were 3 NATO supporters of varying degrees. They weren't all the same. And an anti-Chavista Venezuelan. In other words, it was an all-out brawl, rhetorically speaking. You have to fight that battle against them by confronting them with ideas, with debates. Otherwise, in the end, this is nothing more than a conversation between people who think very similarly or the same, like Ezequiel and me.
Of course, obviously, exactly. Well, there are images, Fernando, from everywhere. 25,000 homes and 1,200 businesses, that's great. Well, the future of Europe. But anyway, obviously the ones responsible for this are the Russians, obviously, Fernando. Anything else? The Russians.
Sure, but that's obvious. According to some, the Russians are to blame for everything. But hey, look, this way we'll get used to the next decade, the next 10 years, when we won't have electricity or things like that anymore. We'll go cut down trees to keep warm. But then again, there aren't any trees left in Europe either.
Careful, what a lovely image with the little candles. How cozy, Fernando. Who needs electricity when it's 10 below zero?
It's very unecological. No, let's go back to candles, back to the Roman plow. Well, we're going to go back, but not because we want to, rather because we'll have no other choice. That is, this is Europe's future. What you see here, the wreckers, both men and women, are a preview, like a kind of spoiler of what's coming our way. And it won't just be tens of thousands in one part of Berlin. No, this will be widespread. And this is what awaits us. No electricity, no gas. There, those people, Fernando, that's the attitude.
A generator, everyone for themselves, of course. How could it be otherwise? Each one answering on their own.
Exactly, individualism and hyper-individualism to the max. That's it. Instead of joining together and organizing to protest, no. And on top of that, if those diesel groups and such, the diesel generators, were provided by the state, no, you have to buy them yourself.
Obviously not, Fernando. This, as stated, entrepreneurship, Fernando, only generates positive effects.
Indeed, yes, very positive.
The people there, at the municipal office in one of the neighborhoods, obviously with a gathering center, handing out some hot tea and offering a place for people. At least here, there are people sleeping. Well, Berlin, huh? No, this isn't Caracas after the bombs. Berlin now.
We'll go back to a communal situation like in the hippie era. Everyone together, because there won't be, well, since the problem is housing, I think sometimes I'm not so sure about it. We'll go back to forming communities, in one apartment of course, since a person, a couple, a family won't be able to buy one, so we'll live together. We'll return to the worst moments of the Soviet Union, but under capitalism. That is, when parents had to live with their children and other families, sharing the same apartment. That's where we're headed. Wonderful, how great. This is a return to the past, not the future. The past, meaning the 19th century.
Dear Fernando, as always a pleasure. We'll see each other on Sunday, around here, right? Friday. Oh, sorry, tomorrow's announcement. Tomorrow there's a talk with Javier Martinez and Adrian Zelaya here at 9 as always. On Friday with Juan Antonio Aguilar, and on Sunday again with you, dear Fernando. So,
con vos, querido Fernando. Así que
Así
política de
es.
sobra.
Well, let's see what happens in the next few days, because they're going to be intense.
Abrazo, compañero.
Hug, comrade. Until next time, bye, demolishers. And thanks to Beatriz Pulido, as always, for moderating. Bye-bye. See you later.
Hasta luego.